Now, speaking of things that the UK right can learn from the US, Reform UK have been positioning themselves as the centre ground in the last few months. Nigel Farage has taken, I think, a deserved amount of criticism for his new Statesman interview, where he said, and I will quote to you, that he is to the left of the country on immigration. He predicted that Robert Jenrick will almost certainly end up to the right of him on migration by the next election. Quote, I suspect he'll probably want to go further. That's just my instinct for someone who wants to make noise. And he thinks that he is to, quote, the left of the country on the issue. I haven't fought the change itself, provided it comes with integration. It hasn't, Nigel. Now what? No answer. He said that things have really shifted in the country at large as he seems to moderate his image. The country, it seems, is radicalising, and so is the Conservative Party. So, having declared to Channel 4 that he's no longer a populist, it looked for a minute there that Nigel Farage was positioning himself as an unpopulist, because by saying that, you're not surfing the wave, as Gwaine Towler once said, used the analogy to describe Nigel Farage's impeccable political timing. I would say that instead he is occupying vacant space in the Overton window that has already been cleared by people who are either more courageous or careless, who act as minesweepers on certain issues to give the public permission to voice their views, what many of them already have. Not only is he not doing that, not only is he not surfing the wave, but rather crashing out and eating sea foam, not very Lindy of you, Nigel. Instead, he is actively setting himself and his face against what the public already want, and voluntarily seeming to say, I don't want your votes, I have a moral position on this, and at the expense of gaining power, I will continue to condemn your desire for lower levels of legal migration. This came off the bat of him speaking to the UK's very own reverse Jim Cramer, Fraser Nelson. Find me a more incorrect man in Britain and I will give you a medal. I would almost bet my mortgage on someone having, literally anyone having, a better prediction record than Fraser Nelson. Fraser Nelson had spoken to Farage, and Farage then gave an interview to The Times where he had basically said, anyone to the right of me is comparable to fascism. He had said, I'm not in Andrew Tate's camp, neither am I, by the way. He's a pimp turned imam. I would have him imprisoned. And he says, but I see why he's doing well. He said, if you don't give young men a voice, you wait till what comes after me. Those who try to demonize me could be in for a terrible shock once I'm gone. That's why we say we believe that we have the last chance to restore confidence in the democratic system to change things. So there's some resentment that's been built up by the perception that Farage is drawing up the drawbridge for anyone to the right of him and constantly signalling his desire to be accepted by a hostile media class who builds these boogeymen like the infamous Tommy Robinson, for example, to use to contaminate right-wing movements with guilt by association. So they say, isn't reform like Tommy Robinson? And so reform spends all its time denouncing racism as is defined by people who don't want them to ever win an election anyway, and denouncing Tommy Robinson rather than dedicating their attention to concrete policy, addressing the issues that voters already care about, winning elections, and then reforming the country as promised. This has been the concern for the last few weeks. This is the concern when, for example, Nigel Farage positions himself as the great inquisitor against the far right, when he says, I've done more than anyone to defeat the far right in this country. Given far right has become Keir Starmer's buzzword for the white British host majority who are concerned about immigration, reform's key voter base, it's not good to keep using that messaging. Fortunately, this is the preface, fortunately, I hear from reliable sources that thanks to internal power struggles at Reform, thanks to people wanting to bend the ear of the king at court, more sage advice is being given. And in the last couple of weeks, Farage himself has put forward much more restrictionist, muscular immigration and criminal justice policies, going so far to compare himself to Nayib Bukele and request that not just foreign criminals be deported, every single foreign criminal in Britain's prisons be deported. I think there's about 11,000 from the most recent statistics. But that we will take our worst offenders and send them to El Salvador in an exchange deal. So we will take, chronic drill rap gang murderers and send them to share bunks with MS-13, half naked and shivering in an El Salvadorian prison. Fantastic. Love that idea. Brilliant. He also said that if you have committed more than 3 serious crimes, you'll get automatic life in prison. Great idea. Love it. Scrap all the DEI requirements. Scrap all of the non-crime hate incidents. Scrap tweet policing and go back to street policing. Ensure that there are more stringent fitness standards for frontline officers so you don't get nice, some well-meaning, but some busybody-ish moralizing, unfit police women trying to rugby tackle 6-foot muscular gang members who have just nicked someone's watch on the tube. Like, it's not going to happen. Instead, go back to, especially former army officers, going straight into the police and being up to the task of taking down violent criminals rather than sitting behind their desk with some digestives and putting me on a watch list. All of those things are very good, as is Farage's Mail Online piece from about 2 weeks ago, which said now that Reform is a net negative migration party, not net zero, so no longer one in, one out. Zia Yusuf confirmed this on X in response to Mike Jones, who's an excellent advocate for migration restriction. They are now a net negative migration party, that they are now dedicated to deporting all illegal immigrants currently in the country, not just those that are coming after they are elected, but all of them that are currently in the country, which was previously denounced as an impossibility in Farage's interview with Stephen Edgington, and then sort of soft-pedaled as an ambition in his conversation with Fraser Nelson, and that they're banning all foreign nationals from receiving benefits. Excellent. You know, we spend, $7 billion a year on universal credit for refugee households alone. Trying to get the full numbers for this is nigh on impossible because our state is both incompetent and opaque about the massive demographic, cultural, and economic experiment they've run on us without any democratic consent for decades now. All of these are encouraging signs. I want to see more concrete policy before I give the full carrot and stop beating them with the stick, because basically all political commentary and most journalism, if people are honest, is about carrot and stick application to one's own political side. Your enemies are never going to listen to you. Instead, you just have to, like with rhetorical minesweeping in the Overton window, create permission and encourage your political vehicle to take action that is necessary to saving the country and discouraging them when they seem to soften, when they seem to swim in the wake of Cthulhu and drift leftward. And so I am very happy to encourage these policies if they have some meat on the bone. I see one observation and one reason for concern here. The reason for concern is this. Personnel matters as much as policy. And at the moment, there are not as many competent people in Reform as there once were. James Murdoch is now an independent MP. He has voluntarily resigned from Reform, but the rumours are that he's been exiled because someone leaked something mendacious about a former business he used to run to the press because they didn't like him very much. Rupert Lowe, of course, famously persecuted by Zia Yusuf, the former chairman, who is now back as the seemingly autonomous head of Doge UK and doing Reform's media round, so he's still a big media presence for the party. They clearly view him as an asset, whereas I think to the contrary. Rupert Lowe was persecuted and could have been falsely imprisoned if the charge had stuck, which is, of course, ironic for Reform now modelling themselves as the party of law and order. So they need concrete policies and better personnel to actually make good on these promises and give themselves some lost credibility back. But the people currently in Reform are Richard Tice, Lee Anderson, Zia Yusuf, who again, neither I nor our Reform's own base big fans of, Sarah Pochin, who seems nice but unprepared and is again trying to regain some lost credibility from the deficit that she started in because as a former local mayor she went to Pride events and hosted refugee welcome events for Afghans and Syrians, which also doesn't look great, alongside Richard Tice supporting bringing loads of Afghans in 2021 after this massive new Ministry of Defence scandal that found that thousands more Afghans were off the books imported into the UK, and it cost us at least 7 billion quid and counting, because most Afghans, lots of them, don't ever work, and they are the number one nationality for committing sex offences in this country. They commit sex offences at rates 22 times that of British nationals, so we've just been importing sex criminals as a matter of government policy. I'm listing all these people because the saving graces of Reform at the moment are a few people behind the scenes who I won't name, who I know were involved in this strengthening, of policy, especially the Bukele reference. You know who you are. Good job. But also people like, on the periphery, Matt Goodwin and James Orr, who have called out in recent weeks some of the softening by reform and have been trying to provide substantive policy suggestions, which I think they should adopt. So if Matt Goodwin, for example, has called out the fact that Jake Berry, the former member of the Conservative Party who joined Reform UK, defected to save his own career recently. Why we should be celebrating this, I don't know. You know, he's emblematic of how many years of Conservative treachery. Jake Berry, at least Matt Goodwin blames, leaked to the Daily Mail that Liz Truss and Suella Braverman would no longer be welcome in Reform. Zia Youssef said that Suella Braverman, for some reason, should face prosecution for not breaking the super injunction on the Afghan scandal, even though she was bound by the Official Secrets Act, and so parliamentary privilege wouldn't have prevented her from being prosecuted under that, nor Robert Jenrick, which caused then Suella's husband Rail to then leave Reform UK, having famously defected from the Conservatives to Reform, and people thinking that Suella would follow suit eventually. She then appeared with Robert Jenrick at an event a few days after. So it's clear whose side of the bread Suella's is buttered. Anyway, I'm saying this because James Orr, Matt Goodwin, credible people, much more credible than the Conservative Lib Dem defectors that Reform has been taking recently, but they are outnumbered. And so Reform needs some better spokespeople, some solid policy, and it needs to pack its party full of people that if they really are conducting a Ming Vase strategy to carry the brand delicately over the line at the next election, that at least the people holding said Ming Vase believe in the reason for carrying it across the finish line and don't just drop it when you get there. Because this was the problem with the Conservative Party. Remember, David Cameron bragged about them being pale, male and stale, and so he had to change that in the image of Blair by doing all women and minority candidate shortlists, and then they packed the party full of people who, like James Cleverly, who's now getting a promotion in the reshuffle because he's a darling of the likes of William Hague and the exact same people that think that we're in the age of migration and led the Tory party to its defeat. James Cleverly, who got up during the assisted dying debate and said we should focus on intersectionality. And, you know, the MPs very nearly made him one of the last two candidates to be Conservative leader alongside Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick. All of those people should be rejected. All of the people who are warning to the contrary should be embraced. And I'm not seeing that trend yet. When I do see that trend, I'll be encouraged. But the observation is that the trend I am seeing is that Reform are finally catching up to those who were disparaged as the online right, Indian bots, the alt-right, because Rupert Lowe's new Restore Britain, headed up by my good friends Charlie Downs and now Harrison Pitt, they, as one of their earliest policies, set net negative migration. They set mass deportations. Rupert Lowe, in a debate with Ash Sarkar on the BBC, said that speaking English should be a necessity for you to be granted a visa to come to Britain. This is now Labour government policy. So the online right are actually dictating discourse in this country, and Reform UK were very resistant. Even Matt Goodwin, for a time, thought that some promising young people were going down rabbit holes by following the online right, or at least acting as some of its spokespeople, as I have been accused before, as has Harrison, as has Charlie. And instead, they seem to have realised, no, there's now a permeable barrier between social media and real life because everyone knows at least one person who's terminally online. Because our phones are so fused to our hands, cyborgs that we are, that online discourse is indistinguishable from in-person discourse, and that the MPs are all addicted to Twitter anyway. And political carroting and sticking actually works. See the Trump administration responding to their base being upset about the apparent ditching of the Epstein files, or at least their mishandling by Pam Bondi, or the overtures made to possible amnesty deals. Politics is social media. Social media is real life. And the realization of this is now driving policy for all the major parties, but increasingly and encouragingly, since they're top of the polls, Reform UK. So the reason I wanted to make this is to provide some carrot rather than some stick, because I've provided some stick before as a critical friend. See the previous segment on my confusion expressed at the statements by Richard Tice and Nigel Farage and David Bull. Well, lads, well done. Encouraging stuff. I'd like to see more to actually build some credibility about delivering on these promises, but promises are a good start.